October 26th meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. My name is David Carter. I'm the commission chair. This evening is a study session that will be run by our vice chair, Luke Sinclair. But before we do that, a couple of orders of business. I want to let Kyle Kobe describe the order of business this evening. And then I'd like to take a moment to welcome our newest commissioner. So Kyle.
My name is Kyle Kobe, and I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting. Participating live from the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. We will work alongside the chair, who is on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, I have everyone muted so we can talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon located next to the microphone icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. Few reminders to ensure the provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act are met. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. I'll also ask that applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. Individuals who signed up in advance to provide public comments remotely will be called upon by name. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. Staff will direct you to the podium to speak while following social distancing and safety protocols. I want to again remind everyone to please mute yourself when you're not speaking. I'll now turn the meeting over to Vice Chair Sinclair.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thanks, Kyle. I just wanted to give the chair an opportunity. David, is there anything that you wanted to touch base about before we launch into the part I'm supposed to handle? And you're muted, by the way.
Very interesting. Thank you. Forgive me. David Carter, Chair. No, I just wanted to take a moment to welcome our newest member of the commission, Greg Shanklin, joining us. Greg, can you hear us now? Fantastic. We still can't hear you, but at least you can hear us. So hopefully we can solve that audio problem. But do want to welcome you, and we look forward to working with you. So. We'll talk to you soon, and hopefully you can talk to us as well.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you can hear me now, but
now we can. Thank you. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely, pleasure. Vice Chair Sinclair, would you like to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. So before I guess we get started, I just wanted to confirm with Jeff or with Kyle, we don't have anyone registered with public comment. Is that accurate?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Oops, let's see. There we go. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. We do not have any public comment registered for this evening, and there was no one in the commission room to speak this evening.
Okay, thank you. Then we won't need to set aside time for that, so we can just kind of launch into it. Tonight we have the privilege of having Chad Voigt and I think some other folks here to talk a little bit about stormwater drainage.
And then also, I believe Amy Miller was going to talk a little bit about the Northeast Area Sector Plan. And I don't know what order you guys wanted to tackle those in, but I kind of would just let you guys run with it as you may, and we can sort of listen and then have maybe a time that we can ask questions or offer input as you see fit.
I'm set up to go first if you want, Amy. Okay. Good. Can I share my screen?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, certainly.
All right. Figure out which one here. All right, so do you see a blue screen or the presentation?
We see a blue screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the right screen. I've got two screens and I'm juggling them here. Hang on. Who likes that one?
Yep, there we can see the presentation.
So you see North Lawrence Watershed Planning now?
Yep, we do.
Right.
All right, great, thank you. So I'm Chad Voigt. I'm the Public Works Director with Douglas County and the county engineer. And I also, in the past, was with the city of Lawrence, working in the department that Matt Bond is in. I see that Matt's on the call. And I've got some prior experience from those days with North Lawrence, and then now working in the unincorporated areas. So the reason that we are coming together with this presentation tonight is that in August or September, we reviewed the sod shop site plan, you might recall. The Board of County Commissioners heard that item and deferred it based on drainage concerns. The drainage district provided a letter with concerns. There were some landowners that had concerns. And the commission deferred that item so that we could address those concerns through some modifications to the site plan. And the question really was, what are some appropriate methods to address those concerns on the site? And what we're working toward now is that we've sort of developed a standard that we might want to apply in similar situations. And the county commission is set to possibly take action to make those official. So as a first step, we put this presentation together to kind of give some background, and they asked that we share it with you, the Planning Commission, for your information. So with that, let me jump in and show you what I've got here. There we go. So what I've got set up tonight is North Lawrence Watershed Planning is the topic that I've sort of tried to summarize this with. So first, I'd like to take you through some mapping that I've got and kind of give you an idea of the characteristics of the watershed. A lot of you are probably familiar with it, but hopefully there are some things that might be informative. And then I'll go through a recap of the study that was done in 2005 and of the North Lawrence situation regarding drainage. And then turn it over to Amy to review the Northeast Sector Plan, which was somewhat informed by that study. And then finally, I'll explain very briefly what these proposed standards are that we have in mind. Are there any questions? Can you hear me okay? Keep plowing forward. Good. All right, so just to get everybody oriented, everything north of the river in Douglas County is in Grant Township or the city of Lawrence. I-70, of course, cutting across the screen, and the state highways coming in from the north and the east. The airport is in a city area right in the middle of all of this, generally North Lawrence. This is the same exact area with a much different look, obviously. What I've done here is taken our LiDAR topography and generated some banded contours that really emphasize the river valley and the fact that all of that area that we're talking about is situated dead center in a very wide valley. It's really sort of dramatic how, you know, you can pick up on all of the former river meanders and scours that have occurred. Those are from many, many years ago, pre-settlement. A lot of those scours that you see in the earth out there actually define how the drainage patterns work on the ground in farm fields and some of the problems that we face. Those are all sort of following those old paths. So kind of an entertaining view to look at in that same area. So let me take you back to 1941. This is a 1941 aerial that shows all of those scour patterns kind of visible. Haven't changed a lot in the years since then. And also what's noticeable, several things, small scale farming is noticeable. If you look at all of those, the size of those little plots, you know, this was pre-heavy machinery, pre-large scale ag. And also there's no levee. You can see, you know, the riverfront there is all bordering right on properties with multiple outfalls into the river. So jump ahead to 1954, and this would be 3 years after the flood of 51. And you can see a lot of the damage that occurred from the flood and the scars where it's lighter shaded, where it took the topsoil away and exposed sand. You can see those patterns kind of in several places. You can also see the kind of the scope of development that has occurred in North Lawrence at the time, and it's really sort of static. Obviously, people were a little freaked out by the 51 flood, so what you see there is kind of the core of North Lawrence neighborhoods. Interestingly, you can see Westar up on the river in this area. Are you able to see my pointer? Okay. There's Westar being developed. Here's 6th Street going out in Iowa, just constructed, and the movie theater out here on 6th Street. So, yeah, so 1954, we had the flood, and in 66, another major change. We had I-70 come through. I-70 was started in 1956, and this stretch was one of the very first segments to be completed, cutting right across North Lawrence, which did also have some drainage impacts. You can see, though, that even 10 years later, the growth in North Lawrence is fairly limited. As West Lawrence is expanding, North Lawrence is still fairly reserved in how much people are investing out there. There's a little bit of a commercial corridor forming there by the turnpike entrance, and similar to actually what we see today. And then jump ahead to 1976, and I've traced over the levee that was constructed, and that levee in the photo is mostly complete at that point in 1976. It was actually fully complete in 1978. The levee is 15.8 miles long. And again, Matt Bond's on the call, and he's an expert on that levee. So if there are any questions, now's a good chance. But that levee is obviously a major change for the watershed. The Corps of Engineers built it along with many other projects across the nation. And it's a major impact on how the river functions and then what happens within the levee. So looking again at the LiDAR, the topography, you can see that the flow of the river is dramatically changed, and it's forced through that narrow path that's adjacent to City Hall there. Everything within the yellow lines then is sort of a bathtub, and that's it's sort of, they're protected from the major flood, but there are many problems associated with living in a bathtub. So emphasizing that, I've put on here the current floodplain mapping. You can see that the floodplain is all shoved into that corridor and is completely removed from the levee protected areas. The levee was certified. Matt was part of that process, and that's why they show that floodplain mapping outside of that levee. You can see inside the levee those blue areas, and that is floodplain that is mapped. That's the result of drainage within the levee, within those closed areas. And that's a lot of what we're talking about tonight is where does that water go when it falls inside that levee? If you want to learn more about the levee and when it was built and the level of protection and some statements about the future of the levee and that kind of thing, there is a national levee database, and our levee is in there. And looking at the area within that levee, basically refer to this as the North Lawrence watershed. All of the areas within the larger yellow polygon there And then I've gone ahead and put in there a dividing line in the center that basically breaks this into two pieces. And essentially there are two major outfalls from that area. The first is Maple Grove, and that's this Y-shaped tributary. It drains down to this spot, which is the 2nd Street pump station. If you drive through North Lawrence on 2nd Street, there's a little tiny building off to the east. And then adjacent to that is a creek that's concrete lined that just dead ends right there. And all of the runoff from Maple Grove Watershed makes it to that pump station and then is pushed through the levee to the river. The advantage of a pump system is if the river is flooded, the pump can push against the flow. There are many other outfalls in the levee that are gravity outfalls. They're gated. So those are open until the river starts coming up, and then the city has to go out and close all of those. And so in the event of a major river flood, a lot of other areas are also flooded by closed gates. But the main point here is this Maple Grove tributary, this Y shape right here, and leading to that 2nd Street pump station, and the fact that all of that water is entering an urbanized area. And what happens if we increase the amount of water that goes there? The second system off to the east here is in an area that's so much more low-lying that there hasn't been development pressure over the decades. And this system out here is a lot of those old river scars basically leaking over to a point here and then pumping through into the Mud Creek levee right there. So two distinct systems. One other key issue here is that if there's enough water in the Maple Grove tributary to flood this area, the overtopping location is actually right here, and it would go into the other system and flood down this way. So in the event that everything really is bad, the whole area gets flooded. In 1951, the river flood came through and it created a scour right here, and that's where that overflow low point still exists. That scour is Clark's Pond. If you ever go up 7th Street, there's a pond on the east side of the road that's fairly deep. It's about 14 feet deep. That was created by the 51 flood. And that would be the overtopping point for the connection between these two watersheds. So there's a quick photo of that wet well area that the water is stored in this area tributary to that pump house down there, barely visible in the picture, but that's Maple Grove tributary and the 2nd Street pump. One last point looking at this is all of the city storm sewers and roadside ditches that the city maintains. These are all part of what's referred to as the internal drainage system. When you talk about levee areas, the system that's trapped inside is always called the internal system. So this right here is a key component when we start talking about how to manage runoff in North Lawrence, is looking at this internal system and how does it function. And then one final piece, this is a map of basically runoff potential. So what I've got here is I crossed soil type with land use and generated an engineering factor for runoff. So areas that have developed or areas that have heavy soils will have a red color or an orange color, whereas undeveloped and then leaning towards sandy will be more green. So one of the things you can quickly notice is how the Maple Grove watershed up here is primarily low runoff sandy soils. You can also sort of see this as what are the extents of urbanization around here. All of the areas that have gone red are the areas that have pavement and roadways and those kind of things. So with all of that in mind, in 2005, there was a lot of discussion about how the areas north of North Lawrence might grow and how they might develop. And there were some developers with some proposals. There were some people at the Economic Development Group talking about developing at the airport, maybe an industrial park. There was an idea that Highway 24 could be a corridor for commercial development. So those discussions raised a lot of concerns about the impacts on these existing drainage areas. And that's what precipitated the 2005 study that was done. And the Planning Commission actually requested that, and then Public Works took over getting the study put together and commissioning it and then delivering it. So in 2005, HNTB and GBA did this study. And one of the first steps in that study was to sit down with the planning department and sort of project what future growth might look like. And so starting with Horizon 2020, but then looking also at sort of extrapolating development patterns as they had been in other parts of Lawrence, and how might that be played out in the North Lawrence watershed. And so what we have here is a fairly intense future land use projection that thankfully is not where we're headed at this time. So this shows a lot of development, a lot of industrial and office research. The dark purple is the industrial office research areas, or light purple. Commercial is red, commercial corridors, and a lot of residential development. And they used all of those types of land use to model the runoff amounts to project what the impacts would be. So basically, it goes back to the the concept of development paying for itself. If this was allowed to happen, what's the cost to the community? And so the cost of the community was defined right here. This is in 2005 dollars, and the internal system refers to the City of Lawrence systems in the city limits in North Lawrence, and the projected cost to make those systems function at an acceptable level would be $16 million. A lot of that list is actually needed in whether there's development or not. If you've been around North Lawrence enough, you know that there are a lot of concerns and a lot of standing water and flooding in low-lying areas and flooded streets. And I know the city has made some steps toward this list, but that list is kind of it needs to be done list. It would be exacerbated by more development in the watershed. So the other table over here then is all of the improvements that would be needed out in the county. And this would be probably a shared effort between the city, the county, and Grant Township. Many of these structures are county bridges, and they're on township roads. And then there's this large ticket item here, $11 million for a pump station, which would basically divert the watershed into the river before it enters the areas that are populated in North Lawrence. So $11 million for that pump system plus the other improvements gets it to $25 million. Obviously a very hefty price tag for being able to develop in those areas. And the table on the right really is more about if the area were to develop intently. So if it's not developed, these are not necessarily needed. Some of the bridges do need to be replaced, but if you take that development pressure off, a lot of these go away. Here's an example of the report and the improvements that it provided that were needed in North Lawrence. And here is the 2nd Street pump station in this area. And it was recommended to upgrade that to 5 times the existing capacity and pump that under the river. So at $7.4 million for the pumps, plus another $1 million for the pipes over here, just to bring that pump station up to an acceptable level. A lot of these other improvements are smaller projects, road crossings, areas where roadways would be flooded. And then that's a map of the proposed improvements out in the county. Going back to this idea of diverting the watershed, there would be a pump station over in this area that would take both of the Ys of Maple Grove, pump them through the levee into the river, and that would take the pressure off of what's headed down into Lawrence. There is an alternative to the $11 million pump station, and that is at that time a $2.5 million proposal, which would be to create a large channel along Highway 24 all the way over and basically bypass to this other watershed and let the water pond out in these areas. The price tag at $2.5 million for excavation included buying a lot of ground out here to allow that storage to occur. Because if we generate runoff up here and give it to some farmer down here, they're probably not going to take that sitting down. So that price tag included a lot of public land. And then a final piece of that 2005 study was what would happen if the levee breached, because levees are an engineered system. They require repeated inspections, annual inspections, and maintenance over time, and eventually they could fail. Any engineered system can fail. So the question was, you know, if we allow development and invest a lot of dollars up there, what are what are the impacts when we see a breach of this levee. And so essentially it looks a lot like the 1951 flood. All of these areas would be flooded by a breach of the levee. So that's important to remember. And it's also informative in terms of long-range planning for the watershed. So before we pass it off to Amy, are there any questions? You want to take it, Amy?
Yes, I almost shut down Zoom. Sorry about that. Let me try to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director. I am hopefully not going to get as technical as Chad because that is not my job. But we are very lucky to have both Chad at the county and Matt with the city providing us with all of those great resources and knowledge. So this is just a brief overview of the Northeast Sector Plan. The plan was adopted in 2012, and so a lot of you haven't had a whole lot of familiarity with it other than a few development proposals that have come through. I did provide the link at the top where you can actually find all of our area and sector plans. It is an interactive map. If you click on the boundary for the one you're looking for, it'll give you a link to the actual plan itself. The purpose of this plan is to guide future growth. And this plan was a different one than other previous ones that we've done. This plan really anticipates rural and agricultural development with limited urbanization within that plan timeframe. And that was for a number of factors. The general boundary of the plan, it's quite a large plan, but like I said, the majority of it is designed for rural and agricultural uses. But it generally covers, follows along the river on the north side of the river. And it actually covers quite a bit of area all the way up to the airport and even beyond. So that just gives you a general overview of the boundary of that plan. There are detailed sections on existing land use. Some important notes: 72% agricultural when the plan was done in 2012. There are also sections on utility infrastructure, transportation networks, and one of the other ones that I wanted to mention, which you don't see in all of our sector plans, is there's actually a section on gateways. This is considered a gateway into the city of Lawrence. And that's a little unusual for some of our plans. Couple things of note here. This is just existing land use, city and county zoning. And as you can tell, the majority of the plan area is outside of the city of Lawrence limits and is in the unincorporated areas of Douglas County. There is a section on environmental conditions, and this is very important for this particular plan because of the extensive nature of the floodway and the floodplain, and also the existence of the Class 1 and Class 2 soils, which are predominant. The floodway and the floodplain does cover a large portion of the planning area. Chad went into a lot of great detail on that and why some areas are not considered floodplain, and that's because they're levee protected. There is a special class of floodplain. It's Class X, and it's actually dash levee protected. This was a big change in the last 10 years with the FEMA mapping, where they started to distinguish between general Zone X, which is 0.2% annual chance, or the 500-year floodplain, and is unregulated. They actually split out a second Zone X that is that same 500-year or 0.2% annual chance, but it's levee protected. And the reason we get that designation is because all of Matt's hard work in certifying our levee. If the levee would not be certified, then we wouldn't have that designation, and all of that land would go into a zone A, which is 100-year or 1% annual chance, which is regulated. As Chad already said, you know, little to no grade change over the area, and really causes some problems with drainage. There was the North Lawrence drainage study in 2005. This plan does reference that. And one of the big things in the plan is that future development should maintain the current conveyance. So shouldn't increase, add to the problem is a layman's way of speaking, I guess. And then also that class 1 and 2 soils. And there is a high prevalence of that in this planned area. And the plan does speak to trying to protect and maintain those soils. This floodplain map is not as good as the one that Chad showed you, because the one that's in the plan is based on the 2010 FEMA firm maps. We have since gotten the 2015 maps, so that has actually been updated, but this just gives you a little bit of an idea on all the different issues that are going on. And then class 1 and 2 soils, like I said, this is from 2012. It may have had some updating since then, but as the plan is somewhat static, I wanted to present you just what was in the plan, but you can see the prevalence of the class 1 and 2 soils. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the airport, which comes with its own challenges. There is overlay zones that control what type of development can occur where. And that is all in the plan. As part of that airport, there is also a wildlife mitigation buffer that comes with its own limitations. You have seen some airport developments come to you as a body, as the Planning Commission, and you know that there are some extra rules and regulations there. The plan recommends limited urban development, primarily along the existing major transportation corridors. This is due to floodplain soils, airport restrictions, and the limited stormwater infrastructure. And I know that Chad went into that a little bit, some of the things that were recommended out of the 2005 drainage study that still have yet to be completed. And then there's a future land use map. Like I said, this area plan is a little bit different than some of our area plans in other areas. You will notice the large amount of shading. And that is because the predominant land use that this plan recommends is agriculture. The different colors are purple for industrial, blue for public and institutional. The green with the polka dots is the KU field station. And the green itself is open space, and the majority of that is floodway. And there is also a little bit of neighborhood commercial, and then there's some very low density residential. But like I said, the predominant takeaway here is that the area plan calls for the majority of this to remain agricultural in nature. And that is the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions or help you with any ties if need be. I also know that Matt Bond is also on the call. So if you do have questions, I think that any of us can speak up.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Amy or Chad or Matt, is anybody else going to offer any presentation? Or is that the...
I've got a follow-up to walk through the proposed regulations or the standards.
That'd be great.
Can you see my presentation again?
Yes.
Okay. So last section of our lineup here, the proposed Maple Grove stormwater standards is what we're calling it. So looking back at that watershed on the left, the Maple Grove watershed, that area drains into the city of North Lawrence and is the area that we're focused on in terms of if development happens in that watershed, what do we need to do to mitigate effects? And what we had was the sod shop site plan, which came in on this section right here. It was 1/16 of a full section of ground that was developing. There was quite a bit of building area and compacted gravel parking. And so over those sandier soils, that becomes a pretty heavy concern. And that's what we heard from the drainage district and some residents nearby. So when the commission deferred that item, we explored ways to offset the additional runoff that would generate. And, you know, looking at the Northeast Sector Plan saying this should all stay agriculture, obviously the first choice would be to not allow that development. But we are obviously in situations sometimes where developments are going forward and they're difficult to resolve, you know, the pros and cons and make the choice to approve it or not. I've seen that and I know that. So I understood, you know, when the development was going forward, that if they had not put an office in the building, that it actually would have qualified as an agricultural use and it would have been exempt from any reviews. And so I think that's what finally pushed this over the line, was the fact that we would have basically had the same thing if they had not wanted an office in the building, which is sort of bizarre. But they did have an office in the building, which made the review process fall over into site plan review. You all saw that site plan, and then the county commission saw that. And so knowing that this essentially could go forward if that office wasn't in there, I think it was one of those situations where you have to find a way to make this work. So how do we stop runoff from moving into the flooded areas downstream as a result of this increased impervious surface in the watershed? Here's a look at the site, and this is the site that ultimately was approved. And what we did was we came up with a standard where stormwater is stored in a pond that's dug below grade, so that runoff from the impervious areas fall into this sort of, it's a sump or a sink kind of a situation where the water sits in the hole, does not leave. And because of the sandy soils, you can count on higher infiltration rates than you would be able to in other areas of Lawrence. So we're looking to infiltrate the runoff from the additional impervious surface. And this goes back to some of the experience that I had working in Minnesota for a couple of years, doing some consulting where, you know, infiltration is very heavily used in those areas. It's in the glacial till areas where you can count on the ground to move the water. Normally around here, you can't get that. If you put infiltration basins out here in West Lawrence, you know, you're going to basically have mud holes that sit wet the whole time. So using the North Lawrence soils to an advantage, if we can put that water in the ground, then that's one way to move it down instead of passing it downstream. So this is a fairly large basin. It's probably as big or bigger in area than a detention basin that might be required on a commercial area in West Lawrence. The difference is, again, that the outflow is zero from the basin. Looking at, after modeling that, what the effects are, we've got this chart here of 3 different storm events. Basically 2.97 is rainfall. Let's say 3 inches of rain. And then the next storm is 5.14 and the next one is 8.03. So 8.03 is the 1% chance storm in that area. So the blue bars are rainfall. The green bars are runoff in existing conditions. So pre-development as it sits today as a crop field. And you can see that some of the water does soak in the ground and some of it does run off. And one thing to quickly note, it's sort of just a characteristic of hydrology and the way water runs off, is that the difference between the rainfall and the runoff is roughly the same for all these storms, because that's the amount of water that the ground was able to take during that rainfall. These are all 24-hour long storms. So over a 24-hour period, the storm is, or the ground is basically able to take a couple inches of water. So looking at the orange bars then, these are the projected runoff from the site if we let it develop and didn't do anything. And so the difference between the green and the orange is the amount of rainfall. This is in inches of volume, so take an inch over the ground. So the difference between green and orange is the amount that will travel downstream and load the Second Street pump station. And this is from one site. And the yellow or lighter orange bars are the site that we developed with the storage on site to basically, the target was to match the 100-year runoff up here. You can see that in smaller storms, you start to get even more of a benefit. In this 3-inch rain, you're actually allowing less runoff than before the site was developed. And that's because the hole's big enough for the 100-year storm. So the 1% storm. So these are some very, very simplified representations of how the standard operates. It was a fairly easy standard to calculate. It's done in an Excel spreadsheet and using a basic computer program that people use for runoff calculations. Here's a more kind of advanced plot from that computer program. It's still very easy. That's one key, is you don't want to have standards that nobody can, use. So, but this is a fairly advanced plot from one of those runoff calculations, and it shows in black what the existing site runoff looks like over time. So this is a hydrograph. It's the amount of water leaving the site over time. And at the bottom are hours, and running this way is cubic feet per second, which is what you would use for sizing pipes and things. So black is the flow peaking right here and then receding. The double red line is if we allowed it to develop and didn't do anything. So you can see the peak is much higher. You can also see that the volume of runoff is higher. The area under this curve is the total volume of runoff. And so that's the problem, is that additional volume. We don't really necessarily mind that the peak jumped from 31 to 39, because that's really a factor just for the areas in the first few hundred feet downstream. What we really care about is all the volume under that curve that went on down to the Second Street pump station. So the developed site with storage still has a fairly high peak, but what we've done is we've absorbed a whole bunch of volume back here, which matches and exceeds the volume that we've added here. And so the net to the receiving system, which takes hours to accumulate downstream, is that we've basically offset the impervious surface. I also wanted to point out that Lawrence has detention standards for developments in other places. That's what this lower line is. And what that would do is it would slow the water down and have a lower release rate, but it would release all of the storm over time. And so the volume still travels downstream. It's just happening at a lower rate. And that's more a method of controlling peak flow. So there's a dramatic difference between this peak and these peaks. But that's just a point of reference. A detention pond would not help downstream in this case. So that's why we developed a standard as we did. So here's the stated standard, and it applies within Maple Grove watershed in the unincorporated areas. And so if somebody adds impervious surface in those areas, they need to do the calculations to offset this. Site plan must include a stormwater storage basin to hold the increase in runoff for the 100-year, 24-hour design storm. We want to use HEC HMS, which is the computer program I talked about that's fairly easy to use. We want to use the most recent precipitation data from NOAA, which was updated about 5 years ago. That's NOAA Atlas 14. And that is, you may ask, is that accounting for climate change? And yes, it's showing increases in precipitation over the previous data, which was in 92. If soil properties allow, retained runoff must be infiltrated in the ground within 96 hours. And so somebody's going to have to review the soil maps and figure out if the soil's down there that would make this work. If you can dig 36 inches down and hit sand, then you got a good chance of making this work. if the soil properties, number 4, if they prevent infiltration, then you have to provide an outlet that releases it over 72 hours. And this is the fallback that's not as good, but still pretty good. So looking at the time of concentration of this whole watershed, if we can hold that water on site for 72 hours and release it very, very slowly, this would be referred to as extended detention. So this exceeds the kind of detention that you would have in West Lawrence. Then you can do that. We're talking about a very small outlet, like a 2-inch pipe. So it's a maintenance issue. It's more difficult to build, but it's the fallback if you don't have the soils to make this work. The whole site must drain to the basin. Once the basin is full, all the runoff can leave the site. And then the plan has to show the areas and dimensions so that it gets built properly, and then add notes to the site plan so that people in the future understand why it's there and what it needs to do and what the landowner has to do for maintenance. And so we've sort of covered a whole standard right there for this one unique watershed, and hopefully that can make an improvement if additional development occurs. So the timeline that we're on is that we're talking to you tonight about this, and then Wednesday night we'll be at the county commission giving them the same information and making a request that we go on a hearing and adoption on their November 18th meeting. And that's the plan going forward. So, and that's the end of what I've got to present. So if you've got questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Chad, thank you so much. And Amy, thank you to you too. I don't see everyone on the screen, but Matt Bond, did you have anything you wanted to add before we start peppering, the commissioners start peppering people with questions?
Stormwater engineer Matt Bond, also engineering program manager, whatever my new title is. No, I don't. Chad and Amy covered it extremely well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, those were really fascinating presentations. I guess I just put it out to the commission. Does anybody have any questions to ask Chad or Amy, or send Matt's way? Go ahead, Commissioner Willey.
Karen Willey, Planning Commissioner. So does this drainage district have its own elected body and taxing levy authority? And are there 2 in this watershed, one for Maple Grove and one for Mud Creek, or is it just one entity?
Yeah, it's the Douglas County Cod Drainage District. So they actually cover all of this area plus areas south of the river over toward the power plant and up through Baldwin Creek all the way to Rock Chalk Park. So they cover a very large area, and they were interested in this information too.
Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Ashworth, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you for all that information. About the list of projects from 2005, given these standards that you've just proposed, is there anything are there still projects on that list that are deemed necessary at this point?
The internal system list, a lot of that work was to bring the system to a 10-year standard, I think, which would be an acceptable standard. It sort of mirrors some of what was found in the capital improvement plan for the city back in 1996. And Matt's shaking his head. And I think one of the projects that was on both lists was the Maple Grove pump station, or the Maple Street pump station. Very easy to confuse, but it's over near 7th and Lincoln and down to 5th and Maple, and it pumps directly through the levee, and it's a smaller area that's the neighborhoods of North Lawrence. It's sort of a separate issue, but it's on the same lists. So yeah, a lot of those projects could and should be done, and it's a matter of prioritization and putting them in the list. And Matt can go on and on, I'm sure, about it.
Matt Bond, engineering program manager. So to that point, with the Maple Street pump station there on the northwest corner of 6th and Maple, that project was a little over $6 million. And just to put this into perspective, so I think the watershed, I think the plan calls it, there's 9,100 acres that's in the watershed that we've been looking at. And that particular pump station is 192 acres. And so everything north of the railroad tracks is pretty much a bathtub. It doesn't have anywhere to drain. And so at that point, we pick it up with the pump station and take it to a junction box on the northeast corner of 6th and Lincoln. And then from that point, it drains by gravity out. That has been our biggest project we've done to date. We did a couple of blocks on Perry just a couple of years ago. And the idea is we put the pump station in there at 6th and Maple, and then try and get everything to flow in that area in a more efficient fashion to that point. Now, having said that, there's also smaller sub watersheds within North Lawrence, and they all drain to various locations. So yes, we still have some areas that we need to address, and the City Commission is going to see a rate model here very soon within the next couple of weeks. So.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Willey, I see your hand again. Go for it.
Karen Willey, Planning Commissioner. So the drainage issue that we hear the most about when anything happens in North Lawrence is the one under the underpass by Johnny's, but that's not related to this Maple Grove route, because that's picked up before it ever gets to that point. Is that all just internal drainage from those neighborhoods?
Engineering Program Manager Matt Bond. Yeah, for the most part, it's basically it's a basin underneath the railroad tracks, and it's a low area. So it's got its own pump station there at the underpass. When we did the improvements to 2nd and Locust, we tried to collect that stormwater runoff in a more efficient manner before it actually gets to the underpass, and so that has helped. But yeah, that's kind of its own animal in and of itself. So.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Ashworth, go for it.
Yes, Commissioner Ashworth. So in reading through that 2005 study and just looking through the comments, and of course, more recently, when you hear about development in North Lawrence, we're not really hearing a lot about, except for that most recent project you spoke of, we don't hear a lot about what's going on in the unincorporated areas. We hear a lot of the neighborhood, about the flooding there. So I'm just curious as to what the priorities are in that neighborhood as far as development goes. Given the unincorporated area, it's said that that's going to all be agriculture for the most part, with the development of these new standards. But within North Lawrence, where we're hearing most of the concern and most of the commentary, public commentary, what are the future development patterns, any potential changes there? Maybe that's a question for Amy Miller. I don't know, in terms of.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Service Director. Commissioner, are you kind of talking about the north part of North Lawrence, kind of out towards the county, or more about the internal in North Lawrence?
I don't know if I've got the question quite right in my mind.
Just that sort of that area where was what I'm seeing in the commentary is the new building sites. Yeah, every time a new building site comes online, there are concerns about flooding. The elevation of the new building sites seem to be a common point of concern. The ditches overflowing, the roads overflowing. That seems to be where most of the concern is coming from what I can read from the comments. So I'm just wondering about the future development patterns in that area, and are there any potential changes to restrictions or not restrictions in those neighborhoods, those North Lawrence neighborhoods?
Well, I think I can speak a little bit to this. So if the property is located in the regulatory floodplain or in the flood have to adhere to the floodplain management standards. In general, that would require them to elevate 2 feet above base flood elevation, which in some areas can be quite a bit higher than the existing grade. There also needs to be a drainage plan submitted with that that's approved. And so we do take that measure. There have been some developments in the past where they have raised the entire development, which has caused some drainage issues off-site. The more recent ones are basically the pad of the structure is elevated, which allows for much better drainage and also keeps the amount of fill down. But that is still approvable underneath the floodplain management standards. And the city of Lawrence does have floodplain management standards that are held to what's called a higher regulatory standard. We go above and beyond what FEMA requires and also what the state requires in terms of our floodplain development standards. The city also has a floodplain overlay district. And where that really comes into play is newly annexed land and or land that is potentially subject to subdivision. It depends. Small subdivision, no. Larger subdivisions, yes. And there you are required to zone to the floodplain overlay district an extra 2 feet above the technical language is freeboard. But basically you have to add more land than is required by the FEMA maps into the floodplain overlay district. We also have impervious surface coverage standards, which Matt or Chad might be able to tell me when those came into existence. But for residential development, you can have no more than 30% of the area in the floodplain be impervious. Outside of the floodplain, you will notice that a good portion of the city proper in North Lawrence is not in the regulatory floodplain because it is levee protected. The standards don't apply to that land. What does apply is we do have some impervious surface coverage standards that are in the development code. They are much higher than that 30% that I mentioned, but we do have some standards there. And then just your typical city development standards would apply. Commissioner Ashworth, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. Commissioner Ashworth, so some of the listed projects that are for the internal infrastructure, as it was termed, some of those projects will still be online to address some of the issues above and beyond what those, above and beyond the standards that you were just speaking of. So there was a list of the internal infrastructure improvements in that 2005 study.
So Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services Director, and I'll pose this to Matt or Chad and maybe restate your question.
I'm just wondering if some of those are still in the capital improvement project on list for to be completed, some of the internal infrastructure concerns for that North Lawrence neighborhood.
I'll throw that question to Matt.
Engineering Program Manager, Matt Baume. So one of the things that we want to do in the upcoming CIP or our proposed budget is we need to get a firm grip on the condition of our existing stormwater management assets. What do our pipes look like? What do our curb inlet looks like? All of that stuff. And so one of the things that we're going to propose is a massive investigation and inspection of all of that. So we will TV every pipe and every curb inlet, junction box, because we don't know what we don't know. We want to make sure that we know the exact condition of all of that stuff. So depending upon what the city commission approves and how fast they approve that we go through it, then we're going to turn around and then we're going to reprioritize a lot of that same infrastructure. So we may be missing something. There may be some sections of corrugated metal pipe where I don't have any bottom of the pipe, and that in turn causes failure of other infrastructure, whether it be the road or an adjacent water line or an adjacent sanitary sewer line, something along that nature. So that is the proposal we have. One of the things, and Chad can probably speak to this, when the '96 master plan came in, that was actually supposed to come in at $4 an ERU, and at the time it was only funded at $2 an ERU. And so we've kind of been behind the curve from the very beginning of the master plan and the stormwater management program. So what we're going to propose is we're going to try and catch all that up with our proposed rate model increases here in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll address a lot of those projects that you're talking about that have currently been unfunded on that list.
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. If I could just ask Matt, could you explain what an ERU is for people that may not have heard that before?
Yeah, Matt Baume, Engineering Program Manager. So an ERU is an equivalent residential unit. And in '96, they did an estimate of what those were in the city of Lawrence. And so at the time, that was 2,366 square feet is what they came up with an equivalent engineering unit. And so that is how we derive our stormwater fees. So if you're in a commercial or an industrial property and say you have 100,000 square feet of impervious surface, you divide it by 2,366 and then take it times our ERU rate, which is currently $4.50, and then that'll give you your monthly stormwater charge.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. I have a question, maybe for, I guess probably for Chad. The standards are, it looks like the standards require the site plan to account for what's listed in there. And so in that vein, we and the Board of County Commissioners won't really probably see these sorts of things very often unless the site plan has come in front of us for other reasons, right? Because I mean, as I understand, the site plans would be administratively approved, and if they met these standards, we would never see it, correct? Or maybe that's for Jeff or someone.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Commissioner, you are correct. The Planning Commission doesn't usually see county site plans. However, the Board of County Commissioners does approve the site plans under the new zoning regulations. So the Board of County Commissioners would ultimately see those as part of their review process, where the Planning Commission
did not see them at all in most instances.
Okay. So Chad Voigt, County Engineer, did they see the sod shop after Planning Commission recommendations or not?
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. I don't believe the county, or excuse me, I don't believe the Planning Commission saw that site plan, but I'd have to double check to be certain. I don't remember that one being on their agenda. But let me look and double check that.
Well, I mean, Planning Commissioners, maybe, do you remember reviewing the sod shop plan?
We looked at that one, didn't we? No? I'm remembering something else.
I see some nodding heads.
I think we just saw pines.
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. I believe the commission may have seen a rezoning request and not necessarily a site plan, but I'm double checking that to be 100% certain.
Amy Miller, Assistant Planning and Development Services, correct? That is correct. You saw the zoning application.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. I see Commissioner Shanklin's hand up. Commissioner, I think you're muted. Would you be able to is anyone able to unmute his phone? Yeah.
Apparently I'm unmuted now. Greg Shanklin, Commissioner. Sorry about that. I didn't see the red microphone with a line in it in my window, so I went ahead and spoke. But I have a couple of questions. First of all, the HNTB proposal from 2005 made some recommendations on possible purchases of land for retention ponds. Did any of that happen, particularly in the Maple Grove area?
Chad Voigt, County Engineer. Those improvements that involved the large areas out in the unincorporated area were all listed to demonstrate the cost of development if large-scale development were to occur. If we were to back off and leave areas as agricultural, then we're at a different level that actually wasn't modeled in any way. So the assumption is that there are areas that need improvements. I know a lot of Grant Township roads have problems with flooded ditches and roadway problems. Some of our bridges and culverts may be a little undersized, but not enough where we would be spending money on those under existing conditions. So if it's a matter of 20 vehicles per day making it up and down that road and emergency vehicles are able to pass, then there's really not a high need for us to invest more to improve things.
Okay, well, so maybe I misunderstood then. I had thought that some of the retention purposes might be for collective retention for properties that all could take advantage of something like the standards that you drafted for Maple Grove? Or is it expected that every development will have its own retention pond? And is that really possible for all parcel sizes?
Right. So the idea with those storage areas is that if you intercept flow and store it in wide areas, that then you can take pressure off downstream. So it's a coordinated design that's done on a watershed level. It's really something that only a public agency is able to do, not an individual developer or site plan. So assuming then that we're not going to go buy farm ground and dig holes to store stormwater so that someone can develop in the area, then it falls back to if someone develops in the area, they need to deal with this and they need to prevent downstream impacts. So the standard, while it puts a pretty heavy burden on somebody to grade and do the engineering and make it work, that's really the message. Is this was intended to be agricultural in the Northeast Sector Plan. If you want to do a lot of paving and buildings, you've got to find enough space and you've got to hold that water.
So this may not work for all parcel sizes then. Is that
that's accurate? Statement? That's accurate, right?
And so is it reasonable to consider developing a facility for small parcel owners within an area to then collectively establish a retention facility for the benefit of all of, say, adjacent parcel owners, or even parcel owners that are willing and able to, extend drainage pipes, say, to a retention facility?
So I believe what you're saying is if the developer were to take a larger area, meet these standards for several sites, and basically have site pads available, is that reasonable? And, that could be done. I think at the beginning of that, there needs to be the discussion about whether we want to convert that agricultural use or not. And is it in keeping with the Northeast Sector Plan? And so the standard, it's kind of like what you just described is real similar to FEMA mapping. FEMA came through and mapped all the floodplains so that people could make wise choices. And the unintended consequence is everybody can build right up to the line. And, I think people's common sense maybe was better than what the maps made. So the unintended consequence may be, encouraging development. Well, that's not what this is about. This is about if you want to develop and if it's agreed that that's going to happen, then this is how it should be done.
Okay, thanks.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Ashworth?
Commissioner Ashworth, just a quick question. If there are any allowances for pervious concrete or any of those sorts of features in the standards for site planning, in addition to stormwater detention basins?
Chad Voigt, County Engineer. The standards could be partially met with those sort of things. You would offset your runoff numbers if you did that. Those systems are very expensive to install and maintain. So in some ways, I think the choice would be to dig a hole and manage it in the hole instead of under the parking, which is a fairly expensive piece of infrastructure to put in. So yeah, pervious pavers are great, but 10 years down the road, who gets to take them out and dig out all the sediment and road salt and all that stuff that's gone in there, and the trash and debris, and stopped the infiltration rate. So it's better to dig a hole and then be able to manage it.
Sinclair, Vice Chair. Any other questions from the commission? Not seeing any. Well, I guess I appreciate you guys coming. It was extremely informative. And we do appreciate that, and hopefully we can take these things into consideration as we go forward, and look forward to seeing how it goes with the Board of County Commissioners. So thank you.
Good. Thank you for your time tonight.
And I guess, do we have, I guess I'll ask you, Jeff, is there anything else that we need to go over for purposes of tonight's meeting?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. I don't believe so. Just a reminder that we will need to recess and not adjourn to go back into the Wednesday meeting. But I don't believe so at this point.
I guess one question I have is, I sort of think it maybe would be beneficial for us to just introduce ourselves maybe briefly. We did this, I think, last time when we met with the Multimodal Transportation Commission, but with Commissioner Shanklin here, I just didn't know if maybe it'd be nice for us each to go and introduce ourselves briefly. And Chad and Matt and you guys, I don't think you need to be here if you don't want to, unless you really want to learn about us too.
Commissioner Sinclair, Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services Director. If you would like, I'd be happy to call the roll to help expedite that, so people kind of don't have to worry about the screens bouncing around and trying to track everybody. So I'd be happy to do it if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. Maybe everyone could just kind of do a 30-second introduction of themselves, and Commissioner Shanklin, if you'd be able to do that too for us.
Jeff Crick, Planning Development Services. We'll call the roll. Commissioner Ashworth.
Hello, Sharon Ashworth. I recently was the newest member of the Planning Commission, so apparently I still sort of garble my questions and ask things that a lot of people already know, but I'm still on a learning curve, but really enjoy this group and really working with this group, and I'm just continually impressed with the planning staff and their preparedness and their tolerance of questions, and just their astounding knowledge of what's going on here in Lawrence and Douglas County. So welcome.
Commissioner Butler.
Hi, I'm Julia. I've been here a long time. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, Jim Carpenter. My second full term, third in a row of those who that have introduced themselves as a city appointee. I think we should say whether we're city or county as we go through this. And look forward to actually meeting you. This is so bad for what we're doing right now. It's much better when we're able to do these on Wednesday morning and just sit around the table and chat and work on it. So I'm hoping we can get back to that one of these days.
Commissioner Carter.
Hi, David Carter, city appointee, nearing the end of my first term, also commission chair. Lawrence native, geographer. My specialty is geographic information systems, and really happy to see you on the board, on the commission. And I'll just disagree with Commissioner Carpenter enough to say I'm so happy to be doing this rather than nothing at all. I'm really really grateful to city staff for or planning staff for making this possible. And because we went several months without any of these planning sessions, and it's great to be able to get out of the procedurals and to get into learning something and discussing policies. So really happy. And again, grateful for tonight's speakers. Thanks, Chad and Amy.
Commissioner Payton.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Erin Payton, and I'm a Lawrence native, mostly anyway, who stepped away from Lawrence for 5 years and lived in Colorado for a while. I'm looking forward to being in person. Every time we have a meeting, my internet cuts out, I think 3 times this time, and I missed about 10 minutes of the meeting. Today I was a little late because I had an appointment. So it's great to see you on the commission. Welcome, and I look forward to meeting you in person.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Luke Sinclair, I'm currently the vice chair, and I am in the first year of my second term. I'm a transplant from Wisconsin, but I've been down here for 16 years now, living with my wife and daughter and new puppy that I'm constantly trying to watch to make sure it's not peeing on the ground by me here. I'm an attorney by profession, and really enjoy my time on this commission. I'm happy to have you on board too, Commissioner Shanklin. So welcome.
Commissioner Struckoff.
Good evening, commissioners. New Commissioner Shanklin, welcome to the commission. My name's Eric Struckoff. I'm a native of St. Louis. I've lived in Chicago and Seattle and the remote sticks of Missouri. I'm a city kid, really, though. I've been in Lawrence since 1997. I was a research geneticist at KU for almost 23 years. A few years ago, I left that for a job as a builder. I've always been a builder. Had a small construction company here in town, and that kind of took off a few years ago, and then I spinned it into a new company here in town. Really enjoy Lawrence, really enjoy the people I'm working with here. Really very proud of this planning commission. They really do good work and really put a lot of thought in the decisions, and glad to have you along. Welcome to the commission.
Commissioner Willey.
Hi, I'm Karen, and Commissioner Shanklin and I have actually had a couple of good conversations about planning already. So welcome and glad to see you here.
And I believe Commissioner Sands has been able to rejoin. So Commissioner Sands, if you'd like to just introduce to Commissioner Shanklin.
Rob Sands, Planning Commissioner. Hey, great to see you on Zoom. Hopefully we'll have a chance to meet in person. As good as this technology is, I feel like we have better collaboration. We're all in the same room together. But we're making the best of it, and city staff's making the best of it. And it's good to have you on board, and hope to get to know you soon.
And certainly, Commissioner Shanklin. Maybe on mute, Commissioner.
Let's try this. Am I unmuted now? All right. Once I figure out this technology, I'll be a lot better, I think. But first of all, I'm really excited about working with all of you. Just a quick background. I'm from Central Missouri, went to K-State, met my wife, and we were married here in Lawrence in the late 70s. We moved to the East Coast for law school, and I spent most of my professional life there. And then in 2017, we retired to Lawrence for the duration, I think. Professionally, as a lawyer, I've represented pension funds, banks, and investment advisors in commercial real estate ventures around the world, mostly in the US and Latin America. I'm also a licensed architect and have a master's in city and regional planning and urban economics from the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm really interested in getting to know all of you.
Thank you for that. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Willey, your hand is up.
I do take exception to Commissioner Shanklin's introduction of himself. It might work anywhere else to say you've moved back to Lawrence, but I know that you actually live in the town side of Clinton, which is part of what makes you a valuable member of stepping onto this board. So I corrected you.
As Karen knows, sometimes people get pretty technical when you say where you live.
Just learned.
That's right. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner or Chair Carter, I see your hand
Thank
up.
you, David Carter, Chair. I would just like to qualify that, though. I believe your postal address is still in Lawrence, though, if I'm not mistaken.
True.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Does anybody else have anything to add or ask before we see if there's a motion to recess? Commissioner Sands.
I move to recess until Wednesday night.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second by hand motion from Commissioner Struckoff. I guess, Jeff, would you need to call the roll on that one?
Yes, please. Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services Director. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter,
Yes.
Commissioner Payton,
Yes.
Commissioner Sands,
Yes.
Commissioner Shanklin,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Struckoff,
Yes.
and Commissioner Willey.
Yes.
Motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, everyone. See you all on Wednesday.